Hello, this is my reading of the next part of The Children of Green Knowe by Lucy M. Boston. She handed Tolly a box of ivory and ebony dominoes. You can put them on any of the heaps. They all played with them. I'll put it on Toby's because he is the oldest. And your favourite? At the bottom of the box, lying from corner to corner, was a long bundle wrapped round in green cloth. Mrs. Oldknowe lifted it out and put it on the floor while she unwrapped it. At first they saw a great tangle of belts, straps and tassels, and then Tolly gave a great cry. It's Toby's sword! If Toby had fallen a little from his high place in Tolly's admiration because he ate with his fingers, how high he rose now, when Tolly pulled the real sword out of its scabbard. It had a long, fine blade with an edge on each side. Tolly lunged forward to poke the bed with it. It went in about 4 inches. Stop putting swords through the bedclothes, said Mrs. Oldknowe in an ordinary voice. Did Toby use it? Asked Tolly solemnly. He never stuck it into anyone, if that is what you mean. But he learned to fence, and he wore it on Sundays when he went to church with his mother. Why doesn't he want it now? Mrs. Oldknowe looked at him with an uneasy, wrinkled face. Then she sighed. Because he's dead, she said at last. Tolly sat dumbfounded, with his big black eyes fixed on her. He must have known, of course, that the children could not have lived so many centuries without growing old. But he had never thought about it. To him they were so real, so near. They were his own family that he needed more than anything on earth. He felt the world had come to an end. Are they all dead? He said at last. They died all together in the Great Plague. The farm bailiff, Boggis, had been to London on business, and he brought the infection back with him. Toby and Alexander and Lynette and their mother all died in one day, in a few hours, and little Boggis too. Only poor old grandmother was left, too unhappy to cry. Tolly sat cross-legged with his head hanging, trying not to show his face. Mrs. Oldknowe got up and walked to the door, where she could look down the staircase into what Tolly called the Knight's Hall, as if she were looking for someone. After all, she said, it sounds very sad to say they all died, but it didn't really make so much difference. I expect the old grandmother soon found out they were still here. Tolly was watching something travelling across the floor towards him. It was a marble, a glass one with coloured spirals in the middle. It stopped by his listless fingers. He picked it up. It was warm. He glanced round the room but saw nothing except that the dust, of which the old box and its contents was full, was hanging in the air as if newly disturbed. Then, under his eyes, the dominoes began of their own accord to stand themselves on end, one by one, till they made a long rectangular curving line, each an inch behind the other. When they were all standing, an unseen finger pushed the last one, which fell over and knocked down the one in front of it, with a soft prrr, which startled the inquisitive chaffinch up into the air. Each domino in turn fell forward, till all were lying flat on their white faces, showing a long ribbon of black backs. Tolly laughed suddenly and loudly. Mrs. Oldknowe looked round. Ah, she said, smiling. Their grandmother taught them that game. Wouldn't she be surprised when she saw it happen all by itself? That's Alexander. Lynette never could do it right. "Aren't they teases?" said Tolly, quite comforted. "I'm going to look at their books." Mrs. Oldknow looked at him with loving approval. "All right," she said. "Dust the books first, and then wash your hands. The books are very valuable." She went away. Tolly did as she said. "I'll clean Toby's sword for him afterwards," he thought, settling himself down with the book of Aesop's Fables open on the floor. The print was difficult, but he knew the stories and enjoyed the pictures. After a while he came to the page that had the ass in the lion's skin, Lynette's favourite. Excuse me. He bent down to have a closer look, but as he did so, 2 hands were pressed over his eyes from behind, and he could feel breathing beside his ear. He put up his hands and felt two very little ones and some curls, soft little cobwebs. "Lynette!" he said at once, trying to catch hold of the fingers, but they melted away and there was nobody. "All right," he said, "you tease. I can tease too. If you won't let me look at your book, I won't let you look at it either." He shut Aesop up and sat on it, listening and looking on every side. He heard nothing and saw nothing, but underneath him the book began to move, as if someone were tugging at it. Suddenly he was frightened, and jumped up and ran away downstairs to his great-grandmother's reassuring company. It did feel horrid, he thought, to excuse himself as he caught hold of her dress and followed her round. She asked no questions, and they sat down together for lunch. Tolly had almost forgotten the snow, but it was still snowing hard. The garden was getting stranger and stranger. The bushes were just hummocks, little hills in the smooth snow. Even the big yews had lowered their branches to the ground under the weight of it, and were getting tied down under the drifts. The snow lay thick round the doors and windows, stopping all draughts, so that the room was warm and rosy with firelight. "This will be a night for telling the stories," said Mrs. Oldknowe. Tolly was happy. "And this afternoon I want to clean Toby's sword," he said. They spent the afternoon cleaning it together. Tolly did the blade with paraffin and glass paper. He was very careful and did not cut himself. Mrs. Oldknowe did the scabbard, which was covered with velvet. Boggis, coming in out of the snow very skillfully, and lovingly undid the belt and straps. "I was once a cavalry officer's servant," he told Tolly. "These straps once soaked in oil for a week before they attached." "Where shall we put it?" said Mrs. Oldknowe when the sword was ready. "But the belt, which Boggis had taken away." "We must hang it up somewhere. Would you like it in your room? It would make a lovely shadow at night." They hung it beside the mirror opposite Tolly's bed. This was the tale that Mrs. Oldknowe told him by the fire that evening. The story of Black Ferdy. "A long time ago, when Boggis' grandfather was the gardener here, my grandfather, Sir Children of Green Knowe, was the owner. He had 3 grown-up sons who kept many beautiful horses. In particular, the youngest, Alexander, my father, had a black mare, which was famous as the fastest racer in the country. They thought of nothing but horses, and could have done with much more stable. Nevertheless, as you know, one stall's always left empty. Now, it happened in the year when my grandfather was made a judge that some gypsy caravans passed through this country, camped for a while on a common outside Greatchurch. In one of the caravans lived an old gypsy woman called Petronella, and her son, who was called Black Ferdy. Black Ferdy was tall and slim and very handsome. There was no girl who would say no to him when he smiled. He was without an equal as a horsebreaker or as a rider. He was afraid of no horse on earth, but all horses were afraid of him because he sat them like the devil, relentlessly. He was famous amongst the gypsies and the pride of his mother. He was, in fact, a horse thief. Black Ferdy soon heard of my father's mare and made up his mind to steal her. He began to watch the house, hiring himself out to farmers as a hedge cutter in order not to attract attention. And he cut off his long gypsy hair and even washed his face. There was a girl called Ivy who worked for my grandmother as a linen maid, and she went every day to hang the washing on the hedge to dry. She was a pretty, good-natured girl who loved to talk and laugh. Black Ferdy knew as soon as he saw her that his work would be easy. He spoke to her every day, and he was so handsome, so amusing, and so flattering that very soon he was her best friend. She could think of nothing else, and often brought in the washing before it was dry, because she could not wait any longer to see him again. Wet days were an agony to her, because she could not go out to him, but had to sit darning. One day, Black Ferdy, who called himself Tom, asked her if there was no place at the hall for him, because if he could work there, he could see her all the time. It is true, she said, they want an under-gardener, but everybody who works here is a son or nephew of someone who has always been there. Judge Old Knowe would never take you. But they took you just because you were so pretty, said Black Ferdy. No, indeed, I am the daughter of Mr. Alexander Sargent, who saved his life in the Low Country. Well, my beauty, you only have to say that I am your cousin, who has served in the Navy and now wants to settle down. My name is the same as yours, you know. Is it really? Well, what is yours? Ivy Softly. Just what I said, mine is Softly too, Tom Softly. Oh, Tom, isn't that strange? I may call you Tom if you're my cousin, but I never knew I had any. Everyone has cousins they never hear of, said Black Ferdy, and he told her a wonderful tale about a mutiny in the Far East, in which he had saved the captain's life, only afterwards discovering that they were cousins too. Poor Ivy believed all he told her, though she was not absolutely convinced he was her cousin. It was not difficult to persuade her to ask my grandmother to recommend Tom to the judge. She thought that if it was not true about his being her cousin, it was only a very little lie, and if he became a husband, he would be in the family then if he was not before. So Blackverdi became under gardener. He was exceedingly civil and industrious and made a good impression. As luck would have it, the first job he was given was to weed the cobbled yard. As he knelt there all day, picking out the grass and mosses, he saw the horses being led out and in, and admired the black mare that he had come to steal. He noticed where the stable key was hung. That evening Judge Oldknowe was entertaining one of the neighbouring squires to dinner. While this was in progress, Blackverdi sat in the kitchen with his arm round Ivy, telling breathtaking tales about the navy to the other servants. Most of it was quite impossible, because he had never been to sea, but neither had the other servants, so they believed everything, with the exception of old Baucis, who every now and then gave a most irritating sniff when Tom's conduct in the story was more than usually admirable. When he could hear that the gentlemen in the dining room were growing merry and noisy, Blackverdi made an excuse and slipped out into the yard. Stealing round in the shadow of the buildings, he entered the stables. Earlier in the evening he had given young Baucis, who was to watch the horses, a bottle of wine to pass the time away, in case the gentlemen drank late. He found him now, as he expected, asleep in the harness room with his head sunk on the table. The lantern hanging from a nail in the wall was only lit a corner of the stable corridor. Outside, the rising moon was hidden from the earth by mist and trees, but high-sailing clouds caught its light, and with their silver-gilt brightness reflected a glimmer through the stable windows that was enough for a field's trained eyes. The Blackverdi took a bridle and moved quietly along the stalls. Most of the horses were lying down, dim shapes that stirred and blew, shaking their manes. Verdi passed them one by one, accustoming his eyes to the gloom. The neighbour's horse was standing, being in a strange stable. It was a staid old hack of no interest to him. The black mare was also standing because she was a fidget. As she sensed his presence, her head flew up as high as the halter would let it. And she snorted and sidled into her corner. The moon must have cleared the trees, for just then the light grew stronger, and Verdi saw in the stall beyond hers a horse that had not been led past him during the day. He had counted them, and his eye, used to rounding up horses at night, could recognize them more certainly than you or I could by day. This horse was a chestnut with 4 white feet, with an arch to its neck and a spring in the movement of its haunches, a nervous delicacy in the lifting of its feet that put all thought of the black mare out of Verdi's head. Now there's a horse for a man to ride, he thought, and turned into the chestnut stall with a bridle in his hand. As he approached, whistling softly, the horse turned its head towards him, putting back its ears and showing its teeth and the white half-moons of its eyes. There was no rattling of the halter ring to which it should have been tied. Blackverdi saw that it was as free and relentless as he was, and that there was a quality of moonlight in its eyes and teeth that his nerves could not endure. He ran in sheer terror, but the horse reared round after him, wheeling through the narrow openings and out at the main door. It caught him halfway across the cobbled yard, snatching the back of his belted breeches in its teeth. It swung him dreadfully in the air and tossed him away. He crashed on to the cobbles and broke his knee. The chestnut stood and lifted its head to give a prolonged, penetrating neigh, so that the cheerful gentlemen indoors put down their glasses to listen with white faces. All the other horses then joined in the clamour, stamping and kicking in their stalls. "Horse thieves!" shouted Alexander, and they snatched up their pistols and ran out. They found Black Ferdy lying helpless with his broken knee, his teeth chattering and his face grey and damp with sweat. However, he did his best to make up a story. "The thieves have got away with the chestnut," he said. "I saw the stable door open, and I came to see if anything was wrong. They were just coming out with the chestnut, 2 of them, and when I tried to stop them, they rode me down. They haven't taken the black mare." The judge and his guests stood by him with their pistols while the 2 elder sons did what they could to ease his knee. Alexander, with the servants, went to search the stables. The eldest son, while he was trying to arrange the injured man so that he could lie more easily, pulled a pair of pistols out of his greatcoat pocket, while Ferdy swore with rage. "Look, sir," said the son, "he was armed." Alexander came back then. "Everything's all right, sir," he reported, "except that Harry Boggis is asleep besides a bottle of wine. It takes more than a bottle to put him under the table, so I guess it was drugged. One of our bridles was lying in the black mare's stall." "Come here, Alexander," said his father, "and be a witness to what this man says. Now, Tom, which horse was stolen?" "The chestnut with 4 white feet," said Black Ferdy, with his teeth chattering, "in the stall next to the black mare. It rode me down and broke my knee. Hurry, sir, you may overtake them yet. There were 2 up." "The chestnut in the stall next to the black mare," repeated the judge. Nobody spoke. Then Ferdy's hair began to stand on end. The judge's guest, who had not yet spoken, now took a lantern and held it to Tom's face. "I know this man," he said. "He is a gypsy known as Black Ferdy. He sold me a horse last Michaelmas at Norwich Fair." "Take him up," said the judge, "and lock him up safely for the night. In the morning we'll send him to the prison hospital." A poor Ivy cried bitterly when she confessed that she had told a lie about his being her cousin. The judge would have sent her home in disgrace, but my grandmother pleaded for her because, she said, Lynette loved her so much. They all thought she meant me. I was only a baby and had no mother, but sometimes now I wonder. What happened to Black Ferdy? He was tried and found guilty and sent to Botany Bay in Australia. What did his old mother do then? No more questions, said Mrs. Oldknow suddenly in a hurry. Old Petronella was as bad as he, worse. Now, off you go to bed.